Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
So, was it his worst week ever? Without a doubt, it's been a pretty miserable time for the Prime Minister. He's been on the defensive since Monday, when his father was linked to the so-called Panama Papers, leaked documents which showed how the rich and powerful use secretive offshore tax regimes. It's led to thousands protesting outside Downing Street and calls for him to resign. For the first time, his approval ratings are lower than Jeremy Corbyn's. Yesterday, Mr Cameron acknowledged he'd handled the affair badly, and overnight, Number 10 published the headlines of his personal income tax returns for the past 6 years, including the tax he's paid. So what, if anything, has he done wrong? We'll attempt to answer that question this morning. But first, here's a reminder of how the story unfolded. The Panama Papers contain links to 12 current or former heads of state and government. In the UK, attention has focused on David Cameron and an offshore investment fund which his late father, Ian Cameron, set up in the early 1980s. Blairmore Holdings was incorporated in one tax haven, Panama, but based in another, the Bahamas. It used a financial instrument known as bearer shares to protect investors' privacy. Then legal, but since outlawed in the UK. Asked on Monday whether the Prime Minister had personally benefited from the company, Downing Street said it was a private matter. On Tuesday, Mr Cameron tried to draw a line under it all, saying, "I have no shares, no offshore trusts, no offshore funds, nothing like that." Later that day, Downing Street sent a clarification. To be clear, the Prime Minister, his wife and their children do not benefit from any offshore funds. On Wednesday, a fourth statement was issued by Downing Street. There are no offshore funds, trusts, which the Prime Minister, Mrs Cameron, or their children will benefit from in future. Under increasing pressure, David Cameron gave an interview to ITV on Thursday, in which he revealed that he had sold his shares in Blairmore in 2010 for just over £30,000. The Prime Minister said the profit and dividends he and his wife Samantha made from the investment were subject to all the UK taxes in the normal ways, and legal opinion suggests Mr Cameron has done nothing illegal. But he has faced intense criticism over his handling of the story. Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell says this has undermined the trust that we have in him. Mr Cameron has now published the headlines of his tax returns covering the past 6 years. They show that in addition to £300,000 that he received after his father's death in September 2010, his mother gave him 2 gifts of £100,000 each in 2011. Downing Street has vigorously denied suggestions that this was done to minimise tax paid on his father's estate. The story so far. Now, the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, and the Energy Secretary, Amber Rudd, have both been talking about this on the Andrew Marr Show this morning. Let's have a listen to that.
I want to see the papers. We need to know what he's actually returned as a tax return. We need to know why he put this money overseas in the first place and whether he made anything out of it or not before 2010 when he became Prime Minister. These are questions that he must answer.
I think the thing to remember is that the Prime Minister and his family have done nothing wrong. I mean, the independent tax expert at the start of this programme confirmed that. Lots of independent tax experts have subsequently done so.
And we're joined now by our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed. He's been following the story all week, so you've been a busy man. So for the first time ever, we've seen a Prime Minister's tax returns, at least the headlines of the tax returns, not the returns themselves. What have we learned?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? David Cameron has gone from suggesting a mere 6 days ago that this was a private matter to a sort of tax, almost shock and awe. He's decided, right, I'm going to put it all out there and then people can make their decisions on the details that we've got. And I've been desperately scribbling down the details that he has put out, and there is a lot there, actually. It shows that he has earned over £1 million since he has been Prime Minister, not just from his prime ministerial salary, but from other income
including
as
rental
well.
Income of
rental
his
income.
home.
So he has paid tax on that of about £400,000, an effective tax rate of around about 37%, which would be pretty normal. As we said in the top of the programme, he has revealed these 2 payments from his mother of £100,000 each, which were gifted to him after his father died.
And he already had the previous year £300,000 from his father.
That's right. Now,
as an inheritance.
Downing Street has said that his mother made those payments to the Prime Minister because his older brother had inherited the house and she was trying to even up the sort of inheritance as it was shared out between them.
As you look at that, are the experts saying that there was any kind of tax dodge involved in this, either from the estate or with the Prime Minister?
I think the whole issue here is what is avoidance and what is sensible tax planning. If you think that putting your savings in an ISA is tax avoidance because it is tax-free in terms of your investments, then you'll probably think that this type of gifting is some form of tax avoidance. The only time it will become tax avoidance is if David Cameron's mother dies. I mean, this is a horrible way to have a conversation, but this is how tax law works. Dies before 2018. There's a 7-year limit on gifts to your children.
But her estate would then pay the tax, wouldn't it?
Her estate would then pay the tax, and the impact would be that her children would have share of a smaller pot of money. But the tax rules are put in place there to ensure that any gifts that are given, if they are given within 7 years of the parent dying, still become liable for inheritance tax. So I think that the one big point is that David Cameron, as do nearly everybody, particularly if they are wealthy, has planned his tax affairs so that he pays no more tax than is necessary. Now, people might think that is morally wrong, but it's interesting.
He once said it was morally wrong, did he not?
No, well, what he was talking about was what he described as aggressive tax avoidance. Those are structured.
This is cuddly tax.
Not cuddly, this is very simple, very vanilla. These are things that would be available to anybody. I think what he was trying to say, or the difference that Downing Street would argue, was it is different from the pop stars and the people in entertainment who used complicated funding mechanisms to avoid tax. And this, which is normal tax planning in terms of what your tax advisor, if you're wealthy, would say to you.
It's a watershed in British politics to see these tax returns. But are we not in danger of making too much out of them? After all, if you have done anything wrong, and I don't suggest for a moment the Prime Minister has, not for me to say, but if you have done anything wrong, it ain't going to be in your tax return, is it?
It isn't. Well, one assumes that Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs don't know if you've done something wrong. As you say, Andrew, it's not to suggest that the PM has done anything wrong. I think the watershed issue is around the issue of a long-held belief in law that your tax affairs are private. And what this has done is opened up, I would suggest, every cabinet minister, every member of the government to the notion they're going to have to publish not just this year's tax returns, but 6 years of tax returns. And if they don't, the question will be, well, why aren't you doing that?
Well, the Cabinet must be over the moon about that. Let's cut to the chase here. Beth, it's almost certain now that the Chancellor will have to publish his tax returns.
I think so. I mean, I think there was an attempt today to kind of shut down the story once and for all by saying, here are his tax returns, the Prime Minister has done nothing wrong, and all they have done is let the genie out of the bottle. The Chancellor will be under pressure to publish his tax returns.
And then everybody else?
Other cabinet ministers will be under pressure. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn today on Mar was even suggesting that people in public life more broadly should have to publish their tax returns. So it is a big moment in terms of transparency and demands from the public for transparency. But if you think about it, this actually began back with our MPs' expenses, I would argue. And ever since then, the public trust in politicians and in the way they behave has been on the slide, and this is a continuation of that, and a continuation for the demand for more transparency.
Well, John McDonnell's just told the BBC, the Shadow Chancellor, we will ensure that any donor that is linked to the Labour Party will not be using devices to avoid or evade tax. Well, good luck on that, because HMRC has trouble doing that. We'll see what the Labour Party does. This has a wider political significance. We're running up to the European referendum. The Prime Minister is widely seen as the main asset in the Remain campaign. It ain't great news when your main asset is being dragged through the news like this.
No, this is pretty much as bad a week of headlines as I can remember since the Prime Minister entered office. And all over an affair, particularly surrounding this offshore company set up by David Cameron's dad, that really has not resulted in anyone being able to level an accusation at the Prime Minister that would stand up in a court of law. There's no suggestion that anyone is credibly making that he aggressively avoided tax. So the question is, if that is the case, how has it ended up getting quite so bad for David Cameron? And I think at the heart of it has been an inability of Downing Street really to explain properly to people what's going on here. And I think that they are still, even this morning, struggling to explain why, if he was doing nothing wrong, his father needed to set up a company in the Bahamas that used bearer shares, this super anonymous form of company liability.
That was the weakest part of the Prime Minister's statement in the early week, that Blairmore, this investment vehicle, hadn't been set up to mitigate or avoid tax. I mean, if you register in Panama and operate out of the Bahamas, I mean, what else are you doing?
I mean, that is patently absurd, and we know that Ian Cameron made a living out of offering this sort of advice to very wealthy clients, and there was nothing wrong with that. When he set up his business, the political climate was absolutely different to what it is today. So there was nothing wrong with what he was doing then. It was simply absurd of David Cameron to suggest that it was not set up for those reasons. I disagree with you about the weakest point. I think the weakest point was the private matter. You know, when David Cameron's spokeswoman suggested that this was a private matter, it all went downhill from there. I think today the headlines about inheritance tax and whether this is some kind of dodgy avoidance or evasion is something of a red herring. He hasn't, as Kamal said, done anything wrong here. It is very standard practice, and there is a world of difference between evasion and avoidance. There is nothing fishy about this in particular.
But I wonder, finally, Kamal, you've been following this, whether the political ramifications are still huge, in that even if he wins I think if he loses the referendum now, he's probably gone. This will encourage it. But even if he wins now, the Tory party may see him, although, as Isabel says, he's done nothing wrong, they may still see him as part of the walking wounded.
On this issue, which has been interesting, the Conservative Party has lined up behind him. He hasn't been attacked as he has over other issues like George Osborne's budget or Tata Steel. So this has actually been quite a unifying moment for the Conservative Party, interestingly. What it does do, which I think is dangerous, is that it makes the referendum much more of a vote about David Cameron, which is the last thing that people in Number 10 want it to be.
All right. Another busy week ahead of you.
Will be.
Thanks for being with us this Sunday morning.
I've been getting away with it all my